Welcome to Check In with Jason Lauritsen, where we explore how to create human, connected workplaces that employees love and that fuel organizational success. Each week, I invite someone to join me who's leading the way in this work so that we can learn from and be inspired by their work. My guest today is Sarika Lamont. Sarika is the Vice President of People and Culture at Vidyard, an online video platform for sales and marketing teams. In her role, she drives the company's talent strategy and leads all aspects of HR, including talent acquisition, people operations, total rewards, and DEI. Sarika, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. Excited for our conversation today.
So, let's start by checking in to learn a little bit about you. And so I'd love to have you share a little more about what you do today, about your role and your organization, if you would, please.
What do I do today? I feel like I do a little bit of everything, but that's the beauty of being in a smaller organization, startup organization, right? You get to wear a lot of different hats. So I am the VP of People and Culture at Vidyard currently. And so if you think about it, I have oversight over all things people. And the alignment of our people strategy with our business strategy in such a way that me and my team and the leaders in our organization work together to continually invest in our people, enable and empower them to do their best work, and to help us drive really amazing and tangible outcomes and impact for all of our customers, particularly obviously in the video space. You did mention Vidyard is a video-based organization. Really, we're here to drive. We have a lot of conviction around the power of video and the power of video personalization at scale with a lot of the things that we're doing with the AI features that we've created. And we really believe that our product can help all sales professionals operate like top performers. That's our goal with what we're doing with the power of video today. Go ahead.
Cool. Keep going.
I was going to say, and then as far as, my team, like you mentioned, we run all things people operations, talent acquisition, talent development, growth and development, total rewards, which is benefits and compensation and executive compensation. And then of course, community and DE&I. And I say both those because we do a lot in the surrounding communities, not just in Canada where the company is headquartered, but in all of the communities in which we live in. And so there's a lot of work that we do both internally and externally in our communities. And of course, DE&I is really at the core of that.
So just for context, can you tell me a little bit about, you said startup, but how big is the organization in terms of number of people? How does your workforce look? Is it distributed? Are you remote or hybrid, or what does all of that look like?
Yeah, so Vidyard is about 170 employees today. We are distributed and we are a remote first organization. So while we have what we call a collaboration center in Kitchener-Waterloo, which is probably about 1 hour, I think it's west of Toronto, we have people all over Canada. And we do also have people all over the US as well. We are predominantly within Canada, but we have about I would say over almost close to a dozen, maybe a dozen and a half of us now in the US, with the remainder of our folks distributed all across Canada. When Vidyard's been around for about, 13 years now, different sort of iterations of the product. At one point, pre-pandemic, Vidyard was an in-person organization and primarily only actually in Kitchener-Waterloo. It wasn't until the pandemic, when of course everybody was thrusted into remote work, that Vidyard opened the aperture and started to hire actually all over North America and even outside. We had a much larger presence at the time across the UK as well. We no longer have that presence in the UK, so we're predominantly just in North America.
Yeah, that pandemic shook all of us up, right? Opened lots of doors, interesting opportunities, especially as you think about a tech startup, you would think being more distributed already, and turns out not the case. So I am curious for you to share a little bit about how you found your way into people and culture work, to the world of kind of HR more broadly, because you certainly did not come a traditional path. So would you share that story?
Yes, I did not. I did not take a linear path to get here. And it's so interesting, like when you mentioned the pandemic, I wasn't technically even in HR during the pandemic. Like when the pandemic first kicked off, I was more on the strategic talent development side at the time. But prior to that, I started my career many moons ago. I won't age myself today. But I started my career actually in sales and marketing in the consumer goods industry. So working for, at the time, which was actually with a Fortune 20 company. just outside of college, just right when I got out of college and undergrad, went and did sales and retail marketing. It was for a tobacco company, which is an interesting consumer goods environment. And then I did that for about 6 years. When I was there, I did get my MBA part-time. So I went to work full-time and then got my MBA at night, and then eventually found my way into management consulting, in particular supporting the US federal government and various agencies across the government. I live in Virginia. I'm about, at that time I was just outside of DC. And so management consulting, particularly supporting the federal government, is a very big industry here, obviously being so close to the Capitol. So I did that for a number of years. When I left the consumer goods organization, I went to a small management consulting startup. I did a lot of work supporting the United States Navy. Actually, funny enough, my company Vidyard is predominantly based in Canada. And one of the countries that I supported doing foreign military sales and consulting was with the Canadian Navy. So it's really interesting how some of these things come full circle. I did that for a few years. I was at that company for about 3 years. And then I went to another startup after that. And that is where I think I would say my career really took a lot of different turns, and probably some of the most exciting years I think I've had in my career, just because it wasn't such a linear approach to the work that I did. I started to support different agencies across the Department of Homeland Security, but doing program management work. So I became a program manager, and then I eventually started to manage a portfolio of different contracts across the Department of Homeland Security. And then I started, and actually at that time, all the different teams that I was supporting were distributed. Not everybody was located in DC. I had people all across the country. So this is well before the pandemic, and very much when work was very much in office. So, but I got my first taste of how do you work remotely, and how do you lead people, and how do you collaborate when you have folks in different states. And then because the company fortunately was growing so quickly, I had the opportunity to wear a lot of different hats. In a startup, when you're growing a lot, you have the opportunity to wear different hats if you want it. And I really wanted to learn as much as I could. So I started to do a lot of scaling and building new business processes, doing a lot of business process improvement across a number of different functions. I fell more into sort of business development and sales. I then started to do a lot more work with our management community and with our customers, our government clients. Every time we win a new contract, we had to figure out how we were going to hire a bunch of new people to be supporting this government contract. So I worked really closely with our talent acquisition team, with our customers. How do you start a contract and all the different elements? So I built a contract transition process, and that's just sort of what started to get me into a lot of different areas across the business from an operational perspective. Eventually, I didn't know it then. I proposed an idea. I'm like, oh, you should make me this director of client delivery excellence. And they're like, what is that? I'm like, here's what the role is, because I saw a gap. And I was like, we need to work more closely with our management community and our rising managers. We need to develop the talent. We need to figure out how we're going to deliver at speed and quality as we continue to win all this more work. We went from a $15 million company with like maybe 60 people to, I mean, it felt like overnight, but over the course of, 4 or 5 years, we blew up to like over 100 million people and $100 million in revenue. And we had like 500 people. And so we really need to think about our scale before that. And eventually I came up with another idea called integrated talent management. And that was because I saw a lot of gaps as we grew. The business and the people side started to work in silos. And even the business functions, like business development, was no longer always talking to those that were actually delivering to the customers. Well, how are you writing proposals and responding to RFPs to the government if you don't even know what we're doing without partnering the people that are on the field and on the ground? And so I started to see those silos built. And then I did some research on something called integrated talent management. I built a framework on how we could break the silos and bring the people and the business side more closely together. Because at the time, HR was a much more transactional function. Pitched it to my CEO, and he's like, this is so amazing, but I'm going to sell. I was like, what do you mean you're going to sell? And he's like, I can't grow this business any more than I have. I'm bringing in a private equity and a new CEO. I ran integration for that. For when the company that was acquiring us, I ran the integration, got to know the new CEO and private equity team. And then eventually I pitched this idea to them, and they're like, this is really cool. And I'm like, well, it's one of your pillars. There's inorganic growth, organic growth, and then there's the culture. I think this is what we need to do. And I'm like, give me 1 year. Don't give me people. I'll work cross-functionally with the stakeholders we have. I'll do, these three things, and this is how I'll measure success. And if I do that in a year, you have to let me build a team. And I did it. I built career paths. I built new competencies, and I brought in I built a learning and development system and ecosystem, and acquired a learning platform called Udemy and integrated it into the business. And because I did those three things, by the end of the year, they said, you can build a team. And that's actually how I found my way originally into HR, if you will. I didn't own all of HR until I left that organization after 8 years. And then I joined my first tech company with a woman that was a mentor of mine who was set to be a CHRO. She was like, I love what you did here. I want you to do this, but I want you to do this on a global scale. So it's going to be like 3,000 people across 7 countries. And by the way, they want to take this company public, and I want you to help me IPO. And so that was my first foray into tech. And then I started to own all facets of HR. Eventually she exited, and then I became the chief talent officer. So a lot of lattices, a lot of ups and downs, lefts and rights. I took steps back to take steps forward. Money wasn't always there. It didn't always come right away. But eventually for me, it was like, I knew where I wanted to go. And I knew that I really loved this people culture arena that I didn't know really much about beforehand. And then here I am.
Well, and the thing I love about that story is that it seems like some people find HR, and sometimes HR finds people.
Yeah.
And I think in your story, what it sounds like is, you were in the business, really motivated to make the business better, and just saw this sort of opportunity that like this people part of this is really important to making the business work. And what does that look like? And started like being called towards that work. And it turns out then that work has a name, or it has a sort of fits in this bucket. And so I think I love that story, and I love that perspective on HR, because sometimes I think we lose track of, or it's easy to get caught in the kind of the hamster wheel of HR and forget that really we have our hands on an engine that fuels or powers the business. And that's really what it's about.
I mean, I know it sounds trite, but it is so true. People are your greatest asset, whether you're a product company or SaaS company, or you're a professional services consulting firm. Regardless, it takes people to make the engine go. It takes people to make money and to be profitable and to be innovative at the end of the day. And so for me, I didn't think about it long term. I always kind of thought about things like, I knew I wanted to be an executive one day. I knew I wanted to have like the ability to like really influence the direction of a business and really have impact on people. I didn't always know what that path was going to look like. And what I thought I wanted to do when I was 21, and then I was 30, and then, then I was 40, like it changes. And I think the biggest thing I always tell, folks that I mentor even today is, stop quantifying your success or where you want to go just by the money that you're making, and stop thinking so myopically. Like, just because your job might say X, Y, and Z in your job description doesn't mean, especially if you're in a smaller organization where they need all hands on deck, doesn't mean you can't lean into other things and then learn other things along the way. Because when you open yourself up to not thinking so linearly about the work that you're doing or the way that your career is growing, you're really going to figure out a lot of new things about yourself that you would have never found about yourself, or skills or things that you're passionate about. If you had asked me this even 10, 15 years ago, Jason, I would have never thought I would have ended in HR or people or culture or talent development. Like, never. I mean, not when I was in my MBA, definitely not when I got out of my MBA in consulting. So definitely got to keep the aperture open.
Indeed. Well, I'm glad you found your way here, because we're going to benefit from that. The people in your organization surely are. One of the things I've really appreciated as I've gotten to know you a little bit and hear a little bit about how you talk about your work and do your work is how you really think about process, you think about structure, you think about very direct connectivity between the work of HR, the work of talent, and how it drives business results. And as we were talking about what do you want to talk about, or what could we talk about here, something bubbled up that was really interesting, unexpected, not a topic I would have expected to be talking about, but I think as I've reflected on it, career development is such an important driver of engagement, especially for early career people, but I think for almost anyone, is people want to be learning, they want to be growing, they want to see what their path is, they want to know what that looks like. And you brought up this phrase job architecture, which I'll be honest, I've heard and I've heard people talk about, but I am really curious to learn more about how you do it, especially at the scale that you're at with your organization. So let's start there. First, what is job architecture?
Yeah, I know. It is funny that this is where I go. Job architecture and compensation is like what really I like. To me, they're intertwined. They're one and the same. But a job architecture is where you look inside of your organization and you start to define levels within an organization. And the reason why that's important is it creates a structured framework to align the roles inside of your business, the responsibilities, and the career progression opportunities for an individual inside of your organization. And ultimately, the job architecture is a critical input into your compensation programming. Whether, it starts with the philosophy, but eventually compensation, when you get to a granular level, you're building salary bands and salary ranges and target ranges as it relates to the jobs and the levels inside of your organization. And so those two things are very intertwined. And you said it best, like growth and development is always going to be an important way to engage and retain your employees, but also think about where we are. I mean, even a couple years ago, AI wasn't really like as prevalent of a thing as it is now. And with AI coming into, our working ecosystem in the last year and some change, look at how many new jobs have come with AI, and look at the level of upskilling that needs to be done in certain places. And I know everyone thinks AI is going to come for your job. It's not going to come for your jobs. What it is going to do is the beauty of it is it can take away some of these tier 0, tier 1 tasks that are more administrative in nature. And they're important parts of every function, but they're not. But I would rather automate those things away and leverage the power of AI and the robots, if you will, to give people more time back to do more of the strategic work that I think is what makes the business really flourish, right? And so I think about that from the context of HR. I need to understand if AI is going to automate some of these roles and I no longer need a people ops coordinator. Okay, what do I need instead? What are those skills and responsibilities that I need? And then how do I pay for that? And how much is it going to cost me? And what's that career progression going to look like? And so that it allows you to more effectively plan headcount, as well as it allows you to think about your broader strategy on upskilling, learning and development, So that's why for me, the job architecture and compensation is so foundational. But back when I think about people starting in the world of HR, that never came up. It was always about compliance and policy and managing risk, which again, those things are important. But I think oftentimes there's a lot of HR folks today that have no idea how to do any of these things. And I think it is a really big strategic component about what we do that also allows us to be fiscally responsible, right? And to think about our fiduciary responsibility as an HR person, leader, whoever, on how we build and scale businesses so we don't lose money in the process. And we think very strategically about our headcount and how we invest in it and where we invest in it. That's why I find it to be so important.
So practically speaking, then, when you talk about, describe to me what, when you, like if you were going to map it out on a whiteboard, our virtual whiteboard sort of for me here, what are the components of job architecture that you're working with? So like, I just am trying to think if somebody's hearing this saying, okay, job architecture, conceptually, that makes sense to me. What do you do? What does that look like?
Yeah. So as in anything we do anywhere, but especially in the people function, change management is always going to be a big part of this, right? So I think first and foremost, you got to understand the purpose of a job architecture. Like what problem are we trying to solve by building this job architecture? And what are the objectives so that I can bring not just our senior most leaders along, but also bring our employees along on this journey. So some objectives of a job architecture would include clarifying the role expectations and what does career progression look like right now. And maybe right now we're only a 50-person company. And just remember, a job architecture isn't set it and forget it. The intent is that it will evolve as the business grows and evolves. So you start by, okay, here's where we are today. Here's where I see myself or see this company in the next couple of years. This is the way career progression will look like. It also, like I mentioned, will allow you the objective also will allow you to support equitable and consistent compensation practices and policies. And then ultimately, it's also to help you enhance how you plan the workforce of the future and manage talent. The second thing you have to do is you have to conduct an actual inventory of the jobs that you have in your organization today. You got to gather all the job descriptions, the titles, the key responsibilities that you have today in your organization. And then you got to start grouping those jobs and titles into, families categories. So like engineering, marketing, sales, operations, people, right? That's the next step what you have to go do. And again, HR doesn't do this in a vacuum. I should caveat that. Like HR is doing this in partnership with the business. And I'll tell you why that's important in just a moment, because when we get further down the path, you'll realize that like you need the actual subject matter experts in those job families to help you determine what are the skills and competencies that are needed now and in the next few years to help us define what these roles and that progression should look like. So the next thing you do, like I said, is you organize those your job families or your roles into job families. So your marketing, your operations, your sales, et cetera. And then you get down to like functions and sub-functions. So in marketing, you may have digital marketing, you may have content marketing, you may have brand strategy. In engineering, you have front end, you have back end, you have infrastructure, right? There's all these like sub functions inside of a job family. So then you want to make sure that you have all the different functions that live within that job family also documented. That when you have that full sort of scope of all the jobs, responsibilities, and the functions and sub functions you have in your business, that'll also allow you to understand what job levels you need. A 50, 100 person company isn't going to need 15 different IC job levels, right? You may need I have an entry level, an intermediate level, a senior, and then and that might be your ICs. And then your management might just be like a lead, a manager, a director, a VP, and C-suite, right? But again, it all depends on the size of organization you have and like what you have today and where you think you're going to go in the next 1 to 3 years. Generally, I would say these things will last about a few years at a time before you probably need to evolve them. And then that's when you create your sort of your job paths. Like you have individual contributor, your management, and then you have your executive, which generally is like VP or director and above. And then within those job levels, you define role expectations and competencies. So you have like organizational competencies that are like core responsibilities that everybody needs to have, right? Everybody needs to understand how to effectively communicate. But what that looks like level over level is going to be a little bit different. So this is where you start to define that. Then you have skills and competencies. So those are like then you get like, it's more of like your functional. You have like the core skills that everybody needs to have. And then you have like your technical skills. So like what I need as a talent acquisition specialist, my technical skills and competencies are going to be different than a digital marketer. And so this will also allow us to define those elements again, because remember, all of this stuff is then going to it's going to get tied into career development, but also performance management. And then of course it gets tied also to compensation banding, right? And how people move up within their bands and how do they get promoted, et cetera. So these all get tied together. And then, you also define within those competencies, like decision-making authority and impact. How much does that role contribute to the business goals or to the financials, and then so on and so forth. And then, like I said, next step would take those job levels, assign them to compensation bands by function. Then you have to so you have like a draft, but I will caveat by saying when you are looking at like the technical skills and competencies, this is where you build a process and a methodology on how you bring your subject matter experts in the room. I don't know engineering, right? And so I need to bring really strong experts in the room to help me define what does it mean to be a front end developer versus a back end developer, or what does it mean to be working on the infrastructure versus working on web applications. And so that's where you bring those folks along and you let them be a part of what you're building, and then they get buy-in. So from a change perspective, like you need them bought in. Once you get to all that and you create your draft, then you have to review the framework with leadership, with your department heads. You bring people along, right? You want to ensure alignment with the organizational goals. You also want to bring in focus groups of employees to help you spot any like inconsistencies or gaps. And then eventually, as you finalize that, you will then go and approach how you communicate the framework. Sure. Train managers, enable employees, help them to understand how this is an input. Hey, these are career paths for you. this is how it's tied to performance. This is how we talk about it and rate, assess it in performance. And then here's how performance connects to your pay. And then here's how you can move within bands or grow from one level to the next, right? So to me, this is the integrated piece. There's nothing we do in HR that one thing is not an input into the other. It is an ecosystem and everything should connect. And I know that's not the case everywhere, but to me, that's what a job architecture and compensation is really at the root of doing, is connecting everything.
So a couple questions on that. That sounds, on the surface, it sounds, that makes sense to me. That sounds like good HR. It's good structural, kind of really getting clear about your development framework and that sort of thing. A lot of technical work there, right? A lot of documentation, a lot of alignment, a lot of that kind of stuff.
That's right.
How do you bring that to life then so on the employee side of that, for example, if I'm an employee, I'm in marketing or I'm in a technical role, how are you using that for the employee to sort of get that feeling of, okay, I understand where I am, if I'm motivated to grow, what that looks like. What does that look like for their experience? What do they have access to? How does having clear job architecture sort of, I guess, empower or support that kind of developmental curiosity?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? Look, we put a lot of pressure on middle management to be everything to everybody inside of an organization. But at the end of the day, managers are just like anybody. And they are probably, they're driving some type of progress in the functional area that they're leading, and they're also leading and developing people. They need a roadmap. They might not know everything. And so what a job architecture, the output is, it gives you competencies and it gives you levels and it gives you career paths, and it helps people to understand this is how you progress from one level to the next. Here are the types of skills and the behaviors and the way in which you approach your work that we need you to do. And so it gives managers a roadmap on teaching them and coaching their directs on here's what you need to do. Here's hey, I think you're doing really well here in communication, but here are some things your written communication could really use work. Here's how we're going to go about doing that. So it's a starting point. Now, is it the end all be all? No, but it is a really good map and a framework to have those types of conversations. When you're a smaller organization and you don't have deep budgets and you don't have deep pockets, you might not have access to your own learning system or an L&D team, but it does give you ideas. And what will happen when you start this career path is HR will start to evolve, and then you'll start to define examples of how someone in digital marketing can showcase these communication skills or behaviors we're looking for when they're an entry level versus an intermediate level. And so the point is, it's like an iterative document. You continue to evolve that. But again, it's a roadmap for both the manager to guide their direct reports, but it's also a really great framework and roadmap for employees to take ownership of their own career. At the end of the day, the managers and HR are there to support, to guide, as HR, we're here to build resources to enable both the managers to have those conversations and the employees to understand what's expected of them. But it is up to the employee to own their own career and own their own development. This gives them more of that roadmap on how to do that and gives them a starting point to at least dig into some research. There's so much access, so much information out there nowadays, whether it's with ChatGPT or just people are much more apt to sharing a lot more content about what's expected, in each of these functions, that at least it gives people something like a starting point. Oh, as a digital marketer, I need to be able to know how to do this, and this, and use these tools. Great. Now I can go dig in and I can go find people with experiences maybe on LinkedIn and reach out to them. But to me, it's a roadmap.
Sure. Just curiosity question, because, one of the things that I think most organizations still struggle with today, and I'm curious if you are addressing this in your architecture, is creating equitable job paths for those who have high value technical skill but no interest in people management.
Such a good question, Jason. And you know what is so funny? I said this years ago. I said this probably now 5-6 years ago when I first stepped into strategic talent management. it was always, oh, you're an IC, then you go into management, and then you go into leadership, and then that's your only path. And I remember 6-7 years ago challenging my COO and my CEO and say, but wait a second, not everybody wants that. Not everybody wants to be in management and lead people. Some people just want to be experts in their craft. Why don't we have a path for that? Oh, no, you can't do that. You can't expect to make all this money if you're not taking on more responsibility. I'm like, but there's ways to carve out more responsibilities for an individual contributor as an expert where they're still contributing back into the success of the organization. It just might not be by way of leading and developing people, but there are many other ways. And so I did this actually, I started this 6 or 7 years ago before it was a really big thing. And it's so interesting how this has taken more shape, I believe, in the last 2 to 3 years. So yes, absolutely. This is something I've been maniacally passionate about way back when. Is I see people should be allowed to just get better at their craft because that's what they're really good at. And we need people like that. So we absolutely do have an IC path where you can actually grow to be a director, but you'd be like a director of your craft as an IC versus a director that's leading a function and the people. So what you're really responsible instead of leading and developing people is you're building out that craft and you're getting laser focused on that. But the way that you're contributing back into the organization is you may be a mentor or you may help create artifacts for us to use to upskill those that want to also go down that path or need to learn that particular functional area that you're really great at and you have expertise on. And that's how you can give back to your community. But you're not necessarily leading the performance of individuals. And so a great way to, you're still going to pay what market bears and, like engineers is a great path, right? A lot of them don't want to be people leaders, but my goodness, they are so intelligent. They're so bright and they bring such impact and innovation inside of our organization. We want them to continue to grow. And so many of those that sit in a director of something, they contribute back in a lot of different ways by mentoring rising folks in that expertise or building learning and development modules or teaching lunch and learn. So there are ways that we have figured out for them to give back to the community around them and still be able to grow their career.
That's awesome. And it's such an important thing. And I think it's so interesting to me that there's so many people continue to be puzzled with why we have a management skill gap issue. And it's like, well, we only allow one path up. If you want to make more money, you have to get into management, like it or not. And it's fascinating. I think if we start really getting clear about the kinds of things you're talking about, what are the skills and competencies and what are the pathways for these different it's like there's a Y that breaks at some point, right. Yep. Right? That one goes through management. You're a very average performing, maybe even a slightly underperforming engineer might be a brilliant manager, people manager.
That's right.
And the other is not always true. And so I think it's interesting. So I was curious I had a hunch that you might be addressing that, but I think that's something I hope to see more organizations addressing because I don't think we're being honest about development until we start to create more opportunities for people like that. I agree with you.
My fear is a lot of what we're seeing now is younger generations in the market are no longer desiring to go into people management. And I've heard some HR leaders say that's because we started to create this IC path that people could grow in just their expertise. And so now they're opting for that because why would I manage people if I could make money doing this and not have to take on this extra responsibility? But that's the thing, then you're not designing your paths accordingly and you're not thinking about the power of that subject matter expert who can give back into the organization on a broader level. I don't think that's the reason why people are saying, I don't want to go into people management. The reason why people are saying, I don't want to go into people management, because it's what is the benefit? In this era, post-pandemic, in the last year or two, what we've seen in tech especially is we went from these venture capitalists being grow at all costs, grab all the headcount you can, pay them all this money. And then all of a sudden, inflationary pressure grows. Money is no longer free or cheap. And then all of a sudden it's oh my gosh, no. We can no longer raise money at literally 0%. Now it's all about efficiency. Oh my gosh, no. And then all these layoffs start happening. And then it's do more with less. And then it's, expand the span of control for a manager. A manager can no longer just have 4 or 5 direct reports. Give them 8, give them 10, give them 12, and then expect them to manage 12 people effectively, and then what you have on a manager's plate, and then putting growing pressure on a manager to be the end all be all for employee engagement, employee performance, employee development, business outcome. That's insane. We have done this the wrong way. We are putting too much pressure on that role such that people no longer feel like, what's in it for me to take that path? What, to make an extra $10,000, $20,000? No, thank you. I would rather make $10,000, $20,000 less and have better work-life balance and maybe do some things on the side. That's what's happening. It's not because we've created another path for people to grow their careers. Just as in anything, everybody has different passions, different unique skill sets, different things that they want to invest in. And just like you think about a benefits package, right? People that are married and have children are thinking about their 401k differently than maybe someone who's fresh out of college and who's not making as much salary and needs every dollar they can get. Like, you have different personas for different reasons. And I think what I've started to see HR leaders doing is, and other like business leaders, is conflating those things, because I don't think that is what caused it. It's what we have done. It's the pinch and the squeezing that we have done on our people and our managers, especially. That's what's causing that sort of like friction, if you will, and why people are backing away from that managerial sort of role altogether.
I would add to that is that I think if that HR leader is saying, well, look, we created this IC path and now nobody wants to take the people management path, and they're blaming that, it's like, no, don't blame it, celebrate it, because guess what? Those people are probably not the right people for management. Either one of two things. You're not hiring people who have the capability or interest to manage people, or you're not developing and cultivating it. Or, to your point, middle management sucks.
Yeah,
it is hard.
Sucked, though.
It has, and it's gotten worse. It's gotten worse, right? You look at the data, the middle managers and frontline managers are the most burnt out of any group of employees, because they're getting it from both directions. They're not being adequately supported, right? They're stretched thinner than ever. And so until we address that issue, why would anyone in their right mind want to take that job unless they have to?
That's a different root cause of why that's happening. It's not because we created an IC path for people to grow their subject matter.
No, that's just like those are smart people. They're taking the path that makes most sense because they're like, no, thank you. Yes, this looks much better to me because of what I care about. So that's really interesting. That's a really great perspective. And I think, Will, I'm enlisting to help you push back on that. That is a good. We'll keep the fight up there. So awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I think really, really important work. And sometimes I think at least I know, I love to talk about the people stuff. I spend most of my time talking, and teaching, like, the conversations and the coaching and the really like person to person heart work that needs to be done as leaders and managers to engage people. And sometimes we forget there's all this like process and structure stuff that when you invest in that and do that work, it helps do some of the engagement work for you. And so I really appreciate the work you're doing and you walking us through how you're using that and activating that.
Yeah, I think being a practitioner, it's interesting. Like I've done so many different podcast conversations, webinars, et cetera. And, the one thing I always try to get to is practitioners don't just want to hear all HR leaders saying the same thing from a very bird's eye view. It's like, oh, we need to think about AI and HR and how we use the tools. Oh, we need to think about engagement and like those. Yes, we need to do all those things. But what I'm finding is more and more folks that are actually practitioners of this work, they're looking for guidance on like, okay, I get it, but how do I do this? I need someone sort of coaching me and walking me through the how. Like, I get the why, but I don't get the how, and like, help me. And I will say, I've said this before, the power of community is just incredible. I mean, and where we were pre-pandemic, when I first started like jumping into the talent management and HR world, like they're really the only places that really were around to learn anything were SHRM and ATD, which is the Association for Talent Development. And I never really identified very well with SHRM. It always felt like the parts of HR I didn't like. I'm like, this is so old school. Like, this is not how I want to think. I want to be more progressive. Because I've been in the business, I've been in the front lines, I've led people, I've been the person that's been led, I deal with customers day in and day out. Like, you're not getting it, HR. And I wanted to do it differently. And it was interesting for all the craziness that the pandemic brought to the forefront and what HR leaders had to solve for, it did bring rise to the power of community and this sort of virtual social community. And what I found was more and more people building these sort of communities to share what they were doing, what was working, what wasn't working, because SHRM wasn't helping HR leaders figure out how to navigate the pandemic and how to navigate, what was going on in Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and whatever resources they were building, they were putting it behind a paywall, and not everybody could afford that or didn't have the budget for it. And so it gave rise to a lot of voices in HR, and it gave rise to a lot of communities where people were coming together to support one another. And we were also isolated because we were on the screen and we couldn't leave our homes. And it's incredible, I think, where HR, the world of HR and people of culture has come since the pandemic. And I really encourage and implore a lot of people, like, use your networks, reach out, ask people for help, reach out to me. I'm like, that's why sometimes I tend to get a little bit more granular in some of my conversations, because these are the things that are really going to change how we do work. These are the things that are going to allow us to be more equitable. Because like I mentioned, the job architecture is just one piece. It's a big input into compensation. And if you follow me on LinkedIn more recently, I'm doing this whole compensation, like debunking the myths of compensation series, because I was talking to so many HR folks that I was like, well, so-and-so already writes about this. Like, I don't know if what I have to say that like someone else isn't already writing about. And they're like, Sarika, a lot. Just share what you've learned. You've done this at different sizes and scales. Just start typing, just start sharing. And in 2 weeks, it's incredible, Jason, how many people have reached out and was like, oh my gosh, I would not know how to do this. And so, I just encourage more and more HR leaders, like, put it out there, share with people. You're helping people, and we sharing what we do and how we do it, even sometimes in the most granular of ways. That's what I believe is going to change the way we work and building more equitable and inclusive places. Whether DE&I is going away or not, no, it's not. Like, sure, the letters might not mean this may not be as prevalent because people are moving away from it. That doesn't mean that as an HR leader, you aren't building policy and process to be equitable. No matter what, whether you have those 3 letters assigned to you or not, it is your responsibility to be equitable and fair, consistent and transparent. And this is how we do that.
Agreed. And this is really, I really appreciate you saying that, because I think, we're in a time where a lot of people are very wrapped around sort of the political pushback around particular words. And either you're for equity or you're not. You're either for inclusion or you're not. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's about embracing and creating spaces that include people fully and that treat people fairly and equitably. And that has always been the right thing to do. And it will always be the right thing to do, whether it's politically popular or not. And so the processes like what you described here are how you do it.
Yes.
How you actually do it. You don't have to talk about it or call it anything. Just do the work.
Yeah.
Create equity.
Sexy. You don't have to, it's not always the sexy thing.
No,
so
that's right.
If anyone that's worked with me in the last couple of organizations, they know I nerd out on, job architectures, compensation, pay transparency, how we do it, how we educate. To me, these are fundamentally so important, and they're kind of fun to do also. And it's also a really great way when you think about HR getting to know the business. And that is what is a difference maker. Don't sit behind, your desk and your computer and sit in your little silo and not understand what sales is doing versus what customer success is doing versus what engineering is doing. It's our jobs to understand what all of the business functions and the people that make up those functions are doing and the challenges that they're having, because that is how we're going to make impact. This is such a great conduit to build that connection and to really learn what these different functions are doing and become a real partner for them. Because at the end of the day, that is what they're looking for. That is what middle management is looking for. That is what our senior most executives are looking for. And that is how we're going to better articulate the value and impact that we're bringing into an organization. I could tell you right now, all the challenges that are going on in every function inside of my organization right now. And I can tell you what my team members and what we are all doing, and we're curating different things and how we're supporting, whether it's a talent acquisition side, whether it's learning and development or enablement, right? Or it's a matter of organizational design, or it's helping them coach for performance. Every group has something different going on. And it's my job and my team's job to understand that. But you can't know it if you're just sort of sitting behind your computer and being like, oh, that's not my problem. How do I do that? Well, ask questions, build a job architecture.
Yeah, this is a great process to get
Totally.
inside and really know the business for sure.
Absolutely.
Really great path into it. And I would say, and I'm hoping you would agree with this, like it, as I listen to you talk, there's a little bit of like, I'm sure if I'm hearing this and I'm like, whoa, okay, where do I even start? It's like, just get started, right? Listen to the starting point, go have some conversations and start the work, get out. The most important thing is go talk to the business.
That's exactly
right. I mean, go learn about.
Yep. Be curious, ask questions, meet as many people as you can. Even if maybe you've been in the company for 2 years and you're like, well, it's kind of weird and late now for me to go on a listening tour. No, it's not. It's never too late to go on a listening tour and understand what the business is doing and the challenges that they're having. I meet every new hire that comes into this organization within the first few days of them coming on board so that I can put a face to a name and I start to build that connection up front. And I do donut chats all the time. I'm constantly meeting people that I've met a number of times. I'm virtual. I'm in the US. They're in Canada. If I'm not always able to get to the office when I'm there, there's many ways, even in a remote environment, that you can understand what's going on in the business. It's just, it takes a little extra work, put a little more elbow grease into it, but you could do it. It's an intentional, methodical process. And you're right. Just start somewhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that hard. Don't overthink it.
Get started.
Yeah. Just get started.
All right. So I'm going to ask, one of my favorite questions to ask is, and I suspect you have a pretty strong perspective on this. I want you to look kind of crystal ball and think like 5 years from now. And I'm curious, what do you hope will look different about work broadly in 5 years from what we see today?
That is a really good question. I hope that we are no longer having this ridiculous debate about remote work, hybrid, in office. Like, I hope that we find the right balance of like hybrid, remote work. Like, I think there's something for everybody and we just figure out what works for our organizations, but we don't move away from the ability to work remotely, because in that regard, I think about myself, like it closes a lot of even opportunities for me. And I have a set of skills that I think are pretty unique and cool. And I want to adapt that to like really cool companies. And maybe there's not a ton of those around me. I don't know, but like, don't close off the idea of remote work because you're closing off the idea of like hiring really exceptional talent all over the place. I am excited to see where AI goes in all facets, but of course, particularly in the HR tech arena, because there's some cool startups that I'm already talking to that I'm just like, this is incredible what you're doing with AI, like developing curated learning paths based off of like AI assessing where your job skills and competencies are, and then creating like an actual curated learning path for you to go and take these courses to help you upskill. So upskilling, there's an automated component to it. And it's not just about a person that's sitting in HR that's helping to upskill folks. I hope that we are like further along in this sort of like change journey that we're on about AI, and people are less resistant and they're a little bit more resilient and thinking that like the robots are not coming to take us, but we have figured out a way to coincide with AI and agents who take away the boring parts of our work. So we get to do the really fun strategic parts of our work. And I really hope that we are living in a more unified society, be it in the US or across the globe. Like the divisive nature in which we are operating from today and have been for a number of years now is not healthy. It's not safe. And I just hope that we get through a tough time to get to better understanding. And we live in a world where people are seeking to learn and embrace one another. And the differences that we have, such that diversity in thought and perspective is something that we are embracing and realizing that is what is going to drive real profitability and real innovation inside of companies. And we're not fighting against this. And DE&I as whatever letters, drop the E, add the I, add the O, whatever you want to call it. Like, we're not having this argument, and we're just embracing everybody for who they are and the diverse backgrounds they bring. That's what I am hoping in the next 5 years.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it,
Jason. I think we got to have more conversations like this everywhere. We got to be willing to share. We got to be willing to do the heart work. I love when you say that. I loved it when you said it on that webinar that you were facilitating with us. That's where we first met. Like, I love that. There's so much heart work. I think we can do it. I do.
Yeah, we can. We can. All right. So as we wrap up, my last question for you, in one word, how are you feeling as we wrap up our conversation today?
Energized. tired, but energized.
Well,
Always
yeah.
be a little
Peek behind the curtain. It's Friday, so
Friday,
we're headed into the weekend. Yes. For me, I would say hopeful because I really appreciate the work that you're doing. Sort of it's hopeful and inspiring. It's a very practical way of sort of putting your money where your mouth is when it comes to creating equity for people and an inclusive environment. So thank you for that. If people want to find you, it sounds like LinkedIn maybe would be a great place to find you.
Yep. Sarika Lamont, Sarika Lamont. I am on there. Right now, I'm knee deep in debunking compensation myths. So if you are at all excited about compensation, like I am, come and find me.
Come and chat. All right. We will put your link to find you on LinkedIn and other information in the show notes. Sarika, thank you so much for this. This was a really inspiring conversation.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks for having me. Hope to come back sometime in the near future.
All right, deal.
Awesome.
And thank you for listening today. I hope you can take some of the insight, some of the great advice that Sarika shared, and take that back into your organization. Use it to get started, to start learning more about the business. Maybe start on your own job architecture work. And before you even do that, please remember to check in with those that matter most to you. Maybe the most important thing that you can do today. Sarika, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me again, Jason. Thanks, everyone.